All right, Shabbos, good evening. Let us begin. Again, thank you to Reb Chaim for giving shir last Wednesday. I was misupuk about canceling shir on Thursday, but I didn't know people would want to come out after the kindness again. You would have been here? Okay, okay, good, Matt. I know for next time. Yeah, I know. Big shots right now. Of course I would have gone. Yeah, all right, whatever. All right, Chav Test, Chav Test 29a at 2 dots. Says the Gemara, Hani Sheva the Shabsa Kineged Mi. So we'll say, remember again, in the last sugya, we're talking about over here the halachos concerning Shmona Esrei, and literally again what the number of brachas in Shmona Esrei correspond to. So Hani Sheva the Shabsa Kineged Mi. Who does this? The 7 brachas of Shabbos Shmona Esrei. What does it correspond to? Amar Rav Chalafta ben Shol, Keneged Shiva Kolos Sha'amar David al Hamayim. It corresponds ultimately again to the Shiva Kolos. So remember again, like Kol Hashem al Hamayim, Kol Hashem Hirim. So again, in Tehillim, all of the different, so to speak, voices or sounds of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, there are 7 of them, corresponding to the 7 brachas, or I should say the 7 brachas of Shmona Esrei, correspond to those 7 kolos. Hani Teisha de Rosh Hashanah Keneged Mi. What about the 9 brachas in Rosh Hashanah davening? Who do they correspond to? Amar Yitzchak Demin Kartignin Keneged Tisha Askarat Sha'amra Chana B'Tfilasa. They correspond ultimately again to the 9 times that Chana mentioned the name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in her tefillah. The Amar Mar, now both say, what does Chana have to do with Rosh Hashanah? The Amar Mar, Be'Rosh Hashanah, Nifkida Sarah, Rachel, v'Chana. On Rosh Hashanah, Sarah, Rachel, and Chana were remembered for pregnancy. Right? Remember again, these were 3 barren women, and on Rosh Hashanah, all 3 of these women were remembered for pregnancy. Hani Esrim va'arba detani sekineged mi. I would say 24 brachas. Each one has to have a fast day. Who do they correspond to? Now, and I remember again, we don't have this Shmona Esrei. I should say we don't really dive in the Shmona Esrei today. But the Gemara Maseches Tainis discusses that on a fast day they would dive in an elongated Shmona Esrei comprised of 24 brachas. 24 brachas. So where do you get? What the Gemara is trying to figure out over here is like, where do you get these numbers from? So where does 24 come from? On Reb Chalbo Keneged Chaf Daled Renanos Sha'amar Shlomo B'Shah Shehichnis on the base Kachi HaKadoshim. It corresponds ultimately again to the 24 praises that Shlomo HaMelech uttered. Ultimately again when bringing the Aron into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the Holy of Holies, in the Beis Hamikdash that he built. Now, I'm both saying, now what do the 24 praises of Shlomo when he brought in the Aron, what does that have to do with a fast day? So remember again, I will say, we know the Gemara that brings down that when Shlomo wanted to enter into the gates of the Beis Hamikdash, the gates of the Beis Hamikdash would not open for him. The whole Gemara wouldn't open for him until he mentioned the zechus of David, his father. So what's the idea on a fast day? On a fast day, a person is supplicating for all kinds of things. So corresponding ultimately to the fact that Shlomo HaMelech supplicated to HaKadosh Baruch Hu to open the gates of the Beis Hamikdash. Ihachi kol yom nami nimrinu. So the Gemara says, if that's the case, I don't understand, why not say Shmona Esrei, right? I'm sorry, why not say Shmona Esrei of 24 brachas? No, that sounds counterintuitive. Shmona Esrei of 24 brachas. But why not say the 24 brachas Shmona Esrei every single day? To which the Gemara says, Emas Aminu Shlomo, because when did Shlomo say this? Biyome dirachami, on a day of supplication, right? In other words, on that day when he wanted to bring the Aron into the Beis Hamikdash, but was unable to do so. Anan nami biyom derachami amri lehu. Therefore, we also say it on a day that we need divine compassion. Incredible. Rabbi Yeshua me'en Shmona Esrei. So remember again, if you remember, in the Mishnah, Rabbi Yeshua said that you don't have to daven 19 complete brachas. Rather, what do you daven? Me'en Shmona Esrei. Me'en Shmona Esrei. So we'll say, so what does it mean, my Me'en Shmona Esrei? Rav Amar Me'en Kol Brachu Bracha. So Rav says that according to Rabbi Yeshua almost has like a truncated form of Shmona Esrei that just has a shortened form of each bracha. Short form of each bracha. Shmuel Amar Shmuel says, no. Rabbi Yeshua is referring to Havinenu, what we call Havinenu. And Rabbi say, now what's Havinenu? So let me tell you this outside for just a second. Havinenu, Rabbi say, is taking all, right? Shmona Esrei essentially is comprised of 3 parts. There are 3 brachos in the beginning, 3 brachos in the end, and then ultimately again, originally 12 brachos, then 13 brachos in the middle. What Havinenu does is it leaves the first three and the last three intact, and then consolidates the middle 13 into one paragraph. That's what Havinenu is. Shmuel Amar, and what it does is actually fascinating. In this one paragraph, it takes all of the themes of all of the different brachos and combines them into one paragraph form. So listen.
The same from Tazai, the same from the top of the trees, the same from
Correct. So the Gemara says as follows. So Shmuel Amar Havinenu. So what is the text of Havinenu? Here it is. Havinenu Hashem Elokecha la da'as dirachecha. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, give us the wisdom to know your ways. And I will say, by the way, what you could see is, Thank you. So just like to illustrate this, again, we're not. I'll just show it to you kind of quickly, but you could see how in Havinenu, each line really corresponds to another one of the brachos. So, for example, again, I'm sorry. So, Havinenu Hashem Elokeinu la da'as derachecha. Kadosh Baruch Hu, give us the wisdom to know your ways. Atachonein la'adam das. Umolis levavenu liyirasecha. Hashivenu avinu l'sarasecha. Kadosh Baruch Hu, let us do tshuva. V'sislach lanu liyos geulim. Right, and ultimately forgive us. Slach lanu avinu ki chatanu. Right, virachakanu mimachovenu v'dash. Okay, so again, we're not going to go through all of them, but essentially what you can see is each line of Havinenu corresponds to one of the middle brachos. So again, in Havinenu, you're saying the bracha of Avos, you're saying the bracha of Mechayim Esim and Atakadosh, and then you're saying everything again from Ritzei till the end as well. So the bookends are intact, and the entire middle of Shemona Esrei is consolidated into one paragraph. Distance us from our pain. Allow us to be back in Eretz Yisrael. Gather us from the four corners. Those who go ahead and literally again, so go against your das, go against your will, shall be judged. Wave your hand against the wicked. Let the righteous rejoice over the rebuilding of Yerushalayim, the restoration of the Beis Hamikdash. So again, Es Tzamach David. Va'arichas ner leven yishai mishichecha. Tera nikra atosana. Right? Even before we call out, you already answered. So we'll say, what is that a reference to? Shema kolenu. So you see again, there's like a line or a phrase corresponding to every single bracha. Baruch atah Hashem shomei tefillah. So Rabbi says, so Havinenu is the consolidation of the entire 13 brachas, right, into one paragraph, and it ends, Baruch atah Hashem shomei tefillah, and then from there you go into Ritzei, right, the last three brachas. So Rabbi says, so interestingly enough, here's what's fascinating. Rabbi Yeshua seems to take the approach that in general, you should say Havinenu. That's his approach. Rabbi say, what would be the logic to always say Havinenu? What would be that logic? Right? That people don't really have kavanah when they say the whole Shemona Esrei. So better to give them something small to concentrate on. Better chance of kavanah. Layit Allah Abaye man demasle Havinenu. So this is incredible. Abaye would curse anyone who davened Havinenu. Right? Abaye felt it was a spiritual shortcut and inappropriate. Right? Amar Rav Nachman Amar Shmuel Kol Hashana Kula Mispala Adam Havinenu Chutz Mimatzi Shabbos Umatzi Yomim Tovim. So Rav Nachman said the name of Shmuel in general, you could daven Havinenu throughout the entire year, except for Matzi Shabbos and Matzi Yom Tov. Why? Mipnei shetzarach lomar havdalah b'chonin adas. Because also remember again, on Matzi Shabbos and Matzi Yom Tov, we insert havdalah into atachonin la'adam das, atachonin tanu. We insert atachonin tanu. I'll say, so the beauty of Havinenu is, it's a consolidated form of Shemona Esrei. The problem with Havinenu is that it does not leave any room for insertions. Now, remember, generally, that's not such a big deal. Why is it not such a big deal? Because if you think about it, most of the insertions we have in the Shemona Esrei are either in the first three brachas or the last three brachas, right? Mashiach Baruch Mer Agashem, last three brachas, again, you have Ya'aleh v'Yavo, Ala Nisim, everything is there. There's not really anything that's inserted in the middle except for V'sein Talu Matzor Livracha. But again, you kind of chap that up with what? Mashiach Baruch Mer Agashem. You do have that mentioned, but the one thing you can't with Havinenu is insert Havdalah. So what's interesting to note over here is Rav Nachman says in the name of Shmuel, I'm okay with people davening Havinenu, but you can't daven Havinenu on Matzah Shabbos, Matzah Yom Tov, because there is no allowance for the insertion of Havdalah. Now, what's fascinating about this is, remember again, what happens on Ma'ariv on Matzah Shabbos if you forget Atachan Antanu? You forgot Havdalah. What's the halacha? What's the halacha? Move on. So here's what's interesting is, although if you forgot Havdalah, you don't have to repeat, but the halacha wants a person to have the ability to recite Havdalah. And because Havinenu doesn't give you the ability to recite Havdalah, therefore again, Shmuel said it should not go, Rav Nachman said in Shmuel, that it should not be done on Matzah Shabbos. Maskif la Rabbi Shmuel, v'neimer bracha raviyas b'fnei atzma. But I don't understand, what's the big deal? So just say Havdalah as a separate independent bracha and Havinenu. So I understand, what's the big deal? Just make a Havdalah insertion and Havinenu, say it as its own bracha. In other words, both say the first three brachas, the Shemona Esrei, then say a fourth bracha for Havdalah, then Havinenu, and then last three brachas. Milot Tanah, did we not learn Rabbi Akiva Omer, Omra bracha raviyas b'fnei atzma? It's actually interesting. Rabbi Akiva's position in general is that Havdalah is recited as its own independent bracha. Rabbi Eliezer Omer Balda. Rabbi Eliezer says ultimately again we insert it in Modim. So the Gemara says Atu kol hashana kulog mi avdina Rabbi Akiva. Dahashtanami Navid kol hashana. I'm sorry. Dahashtanami Navid. So the Gemara says I don't understand. We never accept Rabbi Akiva's opinion throughout the entire year. Right? In other words, Rabbi Akiva posits that in general Havdalah should just be its own additional bracha and Shemona Esrei. We never follow that opinion. So because we never follow that opinion, why would we begin to insert Havdalah as a separate independent bracha by Havinenu? To which the Gemara says, Kol hashana kula my time of dinik Rabbi Akiva. So I'll say in general, why is it that throughout the year we don't pass like Rabbi Akiva, that we don't make Havdalah its own independent bracha? To which the Gemara says, very simple, Tamni sari tikun, tishsari lo tikun. So I'll say because again, Chazal instituted 18 brachas, not 19 brachas. Or to better stated, Chazal instituted 19 brachas, not 20 brachas. The idea is we reject Rabbi Akiva's position because there was never the concept of instituting Havdalah as a self-standing, independent bracha. Hachanami sheva tikun, tamni lo tikun. So too when it comes to Havinenu, we will say Havinenu is 7 brachas, Havinenu is not 8 brachas. Maskif la marzotra, v'nichlale, Michlal Havinenu Hashem Elokeinu Hamavdil Ben Kol L'Shlachol. So Marzucha raises an interesting question. He says, I don't understand. There's a way to weave in Havinenu if you want. Right? There's a way to do it. In other words, we'll say, all you need to do is just, you don't have to make it its own independent bracha. All you need to do is what? Just add it in. Havinenu Hashem Elokeinu Hamavdil Ben Kol L'Shlachol. That's it. Just put that phrase into Havinenu. To which the Gemara says, you know what? Kasha. That's a good question. That's a good point. That could be done. Rose, I think I mentioned this. Yes?
Well, Mike, after after Shabbos is over, you can say Baruch Hamad.
Right. You don't need to. It's true. Right. Technically speaking, you don't even need a Havinenu. You don't even need a Atachonotanu at all. However, Chazal said the ideal way is to also go ahead and insert an Havdalah into Tefillah. That's the ideal. You're right. You don't need it, but it's the ideal. So I'll say, I think I mentioned this when maybe we mentioned this a little bit earlier on in the Masechta, that when I came here, Rabbi Price Zichron Livracha had in his office a little siddur from the U.S. chaplaincy from World War II. I think, did I mention this? Yeah. Hey, and it had printed in there for Shachris and Mincha Ma'ariv Havinenu. It didn't have printed a regular Shemona Esrei. It was fascinating. There was not a regular standard 19 bracha Shemona Esrei, only Havinenu in there. It was just fascinating. Okay. I'm sorry. I don't know. I have to every time I mention this story, I have to remind myself, try to track down like, what do they have contemporarily? I don't know. It could also have been that was dafka printed during wartime. So maybe during wartime that's it. I don't know. Right. So
you wonder what they're doing in Gaza.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, in the old ones, they used to print Havinenu. Yeah, it's true. True. All right. But says Kavaita. Amra Bibi Abaye. Kala Shana Kula. Kala Shana Kula. Mispala Adam Havinenu. Chutz Bimos Hagishamim. Mibnei Shetzarach Lomar She'elo Berachos Hashem. So we'll say this is reference to what we just said before. Right? The other problem, so we've been focusing on Havdalah. There's another problem in Havinenu. What's another problem in Havinenu? You can't say the same Talamat Livracha. Right? Remember again, there's no place for that insertion. So because of that, you could daven Havinenu throughout the entire year, but not during the rainy season, because there is no ability to insert V'sein Talamot Livracha. Maskif Lamar Zotra, V'nichlala, Michla V'dashnenu B'naos Artsecha, V'sein Tal Umatar, but you can. There is also because there's that phrase that corresponds to Barich Aleinu, right? The phrase in Havinenu that corresponds to Barich Aleinu is V'dashnenu B'naos Artsecha. And literally again, satiate us, right? Or fatten us up with the beauty of the land. That's the bracha of Barich Aleinu, right? Where we ask Kadosh Baruch Hu to make Eretz Yisrael bountiful. So why don't you just insert it in there? So the phrase in Havinenu is V'dashnenu B'naos Artsecha. Add in there the same Talu Matar. To which the Gemara says, you're right, you could do it, however, Asi Letrude. The concern I will say is if you start adding stuff in to Havinenu and it's seasonal additions into Havinenu, what's going to happen? People are going to get mixed up. Ihachi Avdallah B'chonin Adas Nama Asi Letrude. But 1 second, but why aren't we concerned about inserting Havdalah and Chonin Adas? Isn't that also going to mix a person up? Amri Hasam Kevan Da'asya Betchilas Tzalusa Lo Matrid. Hacha Kevan Da'asya Be'emtza Tzalusa Matrid. So also this is very interesting. The Gemara wants to make the distinction between an insertion in the beginning of Shmona Esrei versus an insertion in the middle of Shmona Esrei. An insertion in the beginning of Shmona Esrei, the Gemara feels, is not going to mix a person up. An insertion in the middle of Shmona Esrei will mix a person up. Now, both say there's one crucial piece of information that Rashi points out there that you have to keep in mind, which is people were davening by heart. People were davening by heart. They didn't necessarily have access to a siddur or to a text. So as such, again, if I'm davening a basic text day in and day out, I got that. The moment you start with insertions and changes and deviations, that's where there is a significant concern that a person is going to come to get mixed up. Maskif la Ravashi, v'neimra b'shomei tefillah. Ravashi brings up, so why not go ahead and mention it in Shomei Tefillah? Damar Avitam Am Ravasi Ta v'lo hiskir gvuras k'shem t'ches amesim machzirin oso shala berachas hashalom ein machzirin oso mipnei sheyachol lo omra b'shomei Tefillah. So the Gemara says, I said, listen to this. We'll say if halacha l'maisa, if a person forgot Masharach Meir Agashim, you have to go back. If you forgot the same Talamat Livracha, you don't have to go back. Rather, why? Because you can insert the same Talumata Livracha in Shomei Tefillah. The Gemara says, "V'havdalah b'chonin adas in machzirin oso b'mnei sheyachol lo omra alakos." Ultimately, again, and Havdalah and Chonin Adas, you also don't have to go back if you omitted it. Why? Because you could always make Havdalah on a cup of wine. To which the Gemara says, you're right, but ta'a shiny. Making a mistake, ultimately, again, is different than just a potential omission. All right, but so we have to stop over here for tonight. We're going to pick up more with Emir Tzim, more on Havinenu, and more ultimately how it's structured, what you can add in, what you can't add in. Emir Tzim tomorrow, we'll say Shkoyach. Ma'ariv.